Hello, I am Trevin Catellis from Collinsville High School.
And I am Jacqueline Ryder from Laurel Highlands High School.
And we are honored to introduce Mr. John Coleman from Janney Montgomery Scott Advisory Group of Uniontown. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We know you're a very busy man.
Sure thing, it's not a problem. I was happy to come.
Thank you, yes. Would you mind if we asked you a few questions?
Sure.
What originally prompted your interest in the field of finance?
I think it stems from my uncle, Hank Opperman. Back when my wife and I, Susan, got married in 1990, probably 2 months after we got married, Hank asked us for our pay stubs so we could take a look at them and see how much money we were making. And then he came back to us and said, this is how much you should invest each month. And that was a start to kind of get me interested in the field.
Okay, that's a great story.
We heard that you attended the University of Pennsylvania. Can you tell us what degrees and certificates you hold?
I actually graduated, to back up a minute, I graduated from Collinsville High School in 1984, and then I attended the University of Richmond for my undergraduate degree. And then Wharton does a conjunction program with Janney Montgomery Scott since we're based in Philadelphia. So periodically, from time to time, we go back for continuing education. And the University of Wharton shares professors with Janney Montgomery Scott, and they do educational programs. And I took the accredited wealth management program through Wharton.
For a student who might be interested in, say, the field of finance, what skills or prerequisites would you say are truly beneficial?
As far as background skills, I would say going to college. That'd be step number one. And once you go to college, if you were pretty definite that you wanted to go into finance, you'd go into a finance degree, or perhaps accounting or a business administration. The hardest thing would be, I guess, is going to college is when you're 18 years old, do you know what you want to do the rest of your life, right? So at 18 years old, it might be a little bit difficult, but I would say if that's the field of interest, you should definitely pursue either finance, accounting, marketing, or business administration.
Have to enjoy the numbers,
it'd be a good
too.
start. Yeah.
Have to enjoy the numbers.
Exactly. You have to enjoy numbers and the people.
What would you consider the highlight of your career thus far?
I'd say the highlight over my 20 years, it's hard to believe 20 years goes by so quickly. Of that 20-year period, 17 years, again, having the opportunity to work with my uncle for 17 years and to learn from him as a mentor, and meeting a lot of good people.
And to follow up that question, what would you possibly consider as a challenge, a true challenge in your career?
The challenge is the stock market itself. It goes up and down every day. You can't predict when it's going to go up or when it's going to go down. So one of the biggest challenges would be your clients and their fears. Whenever the market's going down, just talk with them and say, hey, maybe you can ride this out. And just discussing that eventually the market will recover. We just don't know when. We can't predict it. The next thing would be people that perhaps spend more than they earn, perhaps spend more than they have. Challenge to get them to temper down their spending habits. I think those would be the two biggest challenges.
What recommendations could you give to teens to better understand how to have financial responsibility?
That's a tough question. If I try to think back to when I was a teen, which is a long time ago, I think the biggest thing would be if you get a job, even if it's just doing chores around the house, but your first job, to save money and to know what we all want something, right? We all want to spend our money, and we all have goals of what you want to buy and what you want to do with your money, if you want a vacation or if you want to save money for school. I think if you write it down and say, this is what I'm saving for, and you set that money aside, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to go borrow for it or get a credit card, or I'm going to ask mom and dad to give me the money. I think if you're disciplined and you write down what you want to buy someday and you save for it, it's going to give you a little bit of discipline, and it's going to help you down the road.
Makes
And
sense.
we all know it's never too early to begin saving. What advice would you give for a first-time investor?
First-time investor, I'd say become a first-time saver first. Again, coming back to your job, if it's a part-time job or even a chore that you do at home, say you make $100 a month. If you could save 5% or 10, and it sounds simple, which it is. So if you made $100 and you could take $5 or $10 and save it, either at home or put it in a savings account at the bank, and you just save that for down the road for a rainy day. Because maybe one month you're not going to work, or maybe you own your own car, or you need to pay insurance on that car, or the car breaks down, then you have that money for a rainy day. So the simplicity would be if you could save 5 or 10% of all the money that you earn from the get-go. That way, as you get a little bit older, perhaps to my age, eventually, you will, right? Then you're going to be in the habit of saving money as you go.
We are all teenagers here and have college quickly approaching. What investment plans would you suggest for the unprepared?
For the unprepared, maybe you take a year off. It seems like a rush. Everyone wants to graduate from college or high school and go to college. And everyone's worried about their senior year, or maybe even their junior year, finding a school. If you're not prepared by your senior year, maybe you should take a year and do something else. Some parents might not want to hear that, but find yourself before you just go to college and waste a year or two. If you're not prepared, perhaps reach out. If your parents don't know where to go, reach out to your guidance counselor, or the schools that you're thinking about. Reach out to their financial aid department and talk to them and see what it's going to take for the school that you've selected, how much money you're going to need. But again, don't rush it. It's not like a clock where you have to go in so much amount of time and you have to go before you're 19 or 20.
On the flip side of that, some of the students who might have TAP funds or might already have investment funds, what advice can you give them when it comes time to withdraw funds?
Congratulations first. If you have TAP funds, thank your parents or your grandparents or your aunt or uncle, whoever opened that, or if you have a 529, TAP or a 529. Whenever you take those distributions, I'm sure your parents are going to help you with it. You have to make sure that you have a qualified expense when you take that money out. So any qualified expenses would be related to college. Therefore, when you take that money out, there won't be any taxes. However, if you use that money for a non-qualified expense, such as a car or a storage unit, you're going to have to pay taxes on that distribution. So I'd be careful whenever you do take money out. Whoever the advisor is that set up the account, the 529 or the TAP, share with them what your expenses are and just make sure that they're qualified expenses.
For students completing the Fafsa form for student aid, does the student have to list all savings investments, or are some exempt, for example, a Roth IRA?
Unfortunately, all assets have to be listed on Fafsa. Your parents are going to have to list everything. The only exceptions, or what's excluded, would be your primary home and retirement accounts, i.e. a 401k, a 403b, IRA, or a Roth IRA wouldn't have to be listed. The other item, the prior question, 529 and TAP accounts, those two would have to be listed on the FAFSA form, with one exception. If your grandparents are the owner of the 529, they don't have to be listed on the FAFSA form.
Mr. Coleman, at this time, would you mind if we took some questions from the audience?
Sure thing.
What is the difference between saving and investing?
What is the difference between savings and investing? I think you could Google it or go to Wikipedia. But in my terms, the difference between savings and investing, savings would be more predictable and secure, less risk. Savings would be going to a local bank and perhaps buying a CD or putting your money into a money market account or a savings account, which is FDIC, basically insured up to $250,000. Whereas investing would be more risky. That's where you're taking your money rather than saving it for a short term, you're going to put it into a risk investment, such as a stock or a bond or an ETF, or maybe even if it's not in the market, you're going to buy coins or you're going to buy stamps or you're going to buy an antique car and hope that it's going to appreciate. But the investment part of it would be a little bit more risk associated with it versus savings, a typical savings account, which would have a guarantee.
Next question.
What is the realistic rate of return that an average investor would have over a 30-year period?
Realistic return over a 30-year period sounds like a great question. If we look back over the last 30 years and just did the S&P 500, you're going to be right around 9%, 9.5% over the last 30 years. However, just as I say that, that doesn't mean that you just run out and say, I'm just going to buy the S&P because Mr. Coleman said over the last 30 years it returned 9.5%, so that means going forward, the next 30 years will be 9.5%. We can't say that. If we could predict the future, obviously I wouldn't be here today, right? Neither would you guys. However, with that said, if you looked over the last 30 years, 40 years, or 50 years, or even going back 75 years, stocks have outperformed savings account, bonds, and other investments. And I would think if I was your age today, I'd be more inclined to invest into stocks versus other investments.
Next question.
Do you believe a college student should apply for and use credit cards?
That's a good question, too. Should a college student apply for credit cards? I'd say no. However, just as I say that, so much has changed since I went to college, obviously. And when you get to college, if you were in a bind, again, your car broke down, you needed some quick money, you had a credit card, it'd be easy to use, right? And I'm sure many of you probably already have credit cards. But I would say this, you get that credit card, you have to pay it off someday. It might not be in 30 days, it might be in 90 days or 6 months, and the credit card company is going to enjoy that because they're charging you interest, right? Anyone that sees a credit card statement, if you don't pay it in 30 days, they charge you 18, 20, 22% interest. That's how they make their money. But again, I would say as a college student, I wouldn't apply for a credit card. You might ask mom and dad to lend you one of theirs to use through college, but if you did, if you thought, man, I need to have a credit card because I want to establish my credit and I just want to have it, make sure that you set a limit, perhaps $1,000 or $1,500. And if you do get one, pay off the bill every 30 days. You know, when you get your statement, just don't sit it in your desk or put it in your backpack. Pay it off.
Next question.
Would you recommend students to remain in state for college in order to save money on college?
It's a good choice. If you stayed in the state where you reside, obviously it's going to be more economical. But what I'd say is, if you're looking for college, you're going to go, what, 3, 4, 5 years? If you're going to a 2-year program, maybe it's shorter. I'd say go to a school that you like. You know, your first decision, you're going to be there 4 or 5 years, right? So you want to make sure that you enjoy those years. You don't want to just go and say, hey, I went to college and I got through, I have a degree. You want to enjoy the years, you want to get a good education, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it's practical and a good value. If you're paying for it yourself and you're taking the loans, you're going to make sure you enjoy it, right? Plus you get a good degree. If your parents are paying for it, you need to think about that also because they're on the hook. They're going to be tied to that loan if they're going to take a loan. If they're just going to pay for it, it's their responsibility. So it would be a good idea to look at your state schools first. But at the same time, again, don't just hold yourself back and say, these are the only schools I could go to due to economics. As I said earlier, if you're not prepared and you don't have any money saved, maybe you want to delay going to school for a year or two and do something else and maybe save some money, get a job, or go to the military or do something else just to save money and then find out what you really want to do.
Next question.
When do you feel saving interest rates are going to normalize in the U.S.?
Good question. When are savings rates going to normalize? The question would be, what is normal? I guess if we went back to savings rates in the 80s, they were double digit. Many of you in this room weren't even alive in the 80s. And in the 90s, they tempered down a little bit. If we looked at savings today, anyone that had money at a local bank, you're probably getting about 0.5%, maybe 3/4 if you're lucky. Or if you go on the internet and you find a bank that's going to give you a great rate at maybe 1%. However, if you just look back 10 years ago, or 12, in 2006, savings rates were averaging 3%. I would think it would be another 3 to 4 years before we would even get closer back to 2 to 2.5%. Unless the economy really heats up and does well, interest rates won't jump up quickly. They might go up 1/4 or 1/2 over the next 12 to 18 months. But to go back to normalcy or back to the 3% average or 4% average, I think that will take some time.
Next question.
Should young people invest in stocks, sugar bonds, and other types of investments?
Should young people invest in stocks or over bonds or other investments? Going back to the prior question, the last 30 years, the S&P has averaged over 9%. I think for your younger people like yourselves, 16, 17, and 18, I'd say equities for the long run. But again, short-term stocks could be volatile. But over the long run, that would be my selection.
Next question.
When purchasing a home, should I take a 15-year or 30-year mortgage?
Well, I don't know how many of you in the audience are going to go out and buy a home tomorrow. The question is 15 or 30 years. You go out to buy a home, you think, here I am 18 or 19 or 20 years old, you're going to buy a home for 30 years. The next thing you're thinking is 30 years you're going to live in one place, right? But it happens. But what would you do? My recommendation is you do it in 15 years. But why do banks have a 30-year loan? Because they realize that people have a harder time buying a home. You know, you think about it. If you bought a home for, say, $100,000 and put down 20% and you financed 80 grand for 15 years or 30 years, if you did it for 15 years, you're going to pay about $18,000 to $20,000 in interest to the bank. That's how the bank makes money. If you did that same 80 grand for 30 years, you're going to pay about $52,000 to $55,000 in interest. So you're going to pay the bank twice as much in interest because it's twice as long, right? However, a 15-year loan is probably going to be today about 320 or 325, and a 30-year loan is probably about 4%. So my recommendation would be have enough money first to put down 20%, and then see how much you could afford. If you could afford to do a 15-year loan, which is shorter, your mortgage is going to be higher, do the 15. However, if you couldn't afford that payment, stretch it out and do the 30-year. But then, when you did the 30-year, try to pay an extra payment or two each year. That way you could knock that mortgage down from 30 years to maybe 22 or 21 years. And you'd also save yourself some money. You wouldn't pay the bank as much interest. So I'd recommend a 15. But again, it's what you can afford.
What types of soft skills do you need to become a financial advisor?
You have to be able to talk with clients and talk with people. When you go out to meet with clients that have any amount of money, to them, that's all that they have. So you have to be able to communicate, you have to have good character, and you have to earn their trust. And you also have to be a good listener. You have to listen to your clients and see what their needs are. Everyone in this room, we all have different wants, right, and different needs. And eventually we're going to have different careers. So we're all going to make different amounts of money. Hopefully all of you are going to make a lot of money. But I'd say the soft skills would be, you know, being yourself, being sincere, but importantly, being able to communicate with your clients and being able to listen to them.
Next question.
Will there be job openings in the financial service industry when you enter the workforce?
What, over the next let's say 5 to 6 years? I'd say yes. However, jobs in the financial industry have gradually, over the last 10 to 15 years, have declined due to the advent of the internet. You know, more and more investors do their own investing online. So with that said, I think there will be a decline, but I think there will still be jobs in the financial industry for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15, and 20. Let's think about it. We're all humans, right? Half of us will go on the internet, but the other half of us would like some guidance, and we want to do our own job or careers and have someone else worry about our finances and guide us.
Next question.
Should I invest in mutual funds or index funds?
What should you do? Active or passive investing? The indices over the last 5 years, 7 years with the bull market have done remarkable. They've matched what the indexes have done. So if you bought an ETF or you bought an index fund, you're pretty darn happy. Active management, anytime that there's a bull market, has a decline. I think a good combination. Having a lower expense ETF or an index fund is going to help you. It's going to give you diversification, but also true whenever the market dips or goes down, having an active manager could help you. So having a blend of the two, I think, would be good advice for you.
Next question.
You did a degree in finance. What minor or what courses would be the best to take to accompany that degree so you are more marketable in the workforce?
I think if you were going to go for a finance degree, in addition to that, I might look at a minor in marketing or even speech communication. Let's just face it, even if you elected to get the finance degree and you said, you know what, I'm not going to be advisor, I really didn't care for it. With that finance degree, you're going to be able to go out and work for practically any company that's out there. In the back office, looking over their numbers, helping with projections. But I think as a minor, maybe a marketing degree or, again, a soft skills going into speech communication or even psychology, it's going to help you being able to relate with people.
Next question.
All right.
When I graduate from college and start working, what percentage of my take-home pay would you suggest I save or invest?
Going back to that starting early, I'd say at least 5%. At least get started. Your first job, when you get out there, everyone's going to be introduced to either a 401k or a 403b plan, hopefully, depending on if you're for a profit company or a nonprofit. Meaning if you're for a school or a hospital or a college, you'd have a 403b because they're nonprofit. If you worked in corporate America for perhaps Pepsi or Exxon, for-profit, they're going to have a 401k. So I'd say definitely start participating in the 401k plan so you can put your own money in, and then most plans the company's going to match. So you're going to get a little bit of free money on the side. But I'd say at least try to get started with 5. And then after you're working for a couple years, try to increase that 1% each year. Eventually, the goal would be to be able to save 15 to 20% of your salary each year, if not more. That way, you can control your future. You know that you could retire earlier. You're going to be able to enjoy some of the finer things in life, maybe a bigger home, or you're going to travel a little bit more, or you're going to have a family where you're going to provide college for your children. By having the ability to save more, it's going to help you do more things.
Next question.
What would be your investment approach if I was 25 years old, I was newly married, and I'm just coming into the business world?
That's a lot. Newly married, 25, married, okay, come to the business world. I'd say again, my first recommendation would be to have an emergency fund first. And what that emergency fund would be in a savings account, a CD, just a rainy day account that would be at least 3 to 6 months of your take-home pay. So if your take-home pay was $3,000 a month, I'd want you to have about $9,000 to $18,000 set aside in that rainy day fund. Once you've accumulated enough in that emergency fund, then again, I'd recommend participating in your employer-sponsored plan so you could get the match, be it a simple IRA, 401k, or 403b. Then after that, I'd probably venture out that you'd want to look for a home. So I'd have another account where you were putting X amount of dollars away for your down payment on your home over the next 3 to 5 years. Hopefully by the age of 28 to 30, you'd have enough accumulated that you could have a down payment on your house. Once you got that accomplished and you were putting more into your 401k, then we might venture into opening up your own investment account, perhaps a Roth IRA.
Next question.
How does your investment approach differ by the age of the client?
Younger clients obviously have more time, so they could take the peaks and the valleys of the market. An older client doesn't have that ability to recover. Plus, they don't have the earning powers. Many of our older clients aren't working anymore, so they don't have the income coming in. So with a younger client, not to say all younger clients are going to be very aggressive or going to be 100% into stocks and equity or mutual funds and index funds. But typically, younger clients are going to be more aggressive. We're going to have more risk associated with them because they have more time. You know, if you're back to the question at 25 years of age, you know, you're going to probably work for the next 40 years. Unless you have a real good job or you invest well and you decide to retire at 50. But most in the room today, you're probably going to work till you're 65 or 70. because you're going to probably live until you're 98 or 100, right? We're all living longer. So with that said, coming back to your point, younger people are probably a little bit more aggressive and in the market, whereas older people wouldn't have as much money in the stock market.
Next question.
Does your firm offer internships to college students, and if so, are they paid?
Unfortunately, we do not. As recently, maybe the last 1 or 2 years, we've entertained that, but we don't have internships. We have had some college students that have come to our office and offices throughout the system that have worked for maybe 4 to 6 weeks unpaid, unfortunately. And when you mention that to some college students, they kind of say, well, I'll get back to you. Because bottom line is that they want to learn, but they also want to earn some money. So at this point, we don't have paid internships. I wish we did, because I think it's a good chance to give back and for younger students to have the ability to learn from people.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Sure
It
thing.
was very enlightening.